All right, my name is Dan, and welcome to, I guess, what I'll call the Blind Malazan Sherpa, I guess, is the best way I can say it. I'm just starting this series, and in the last few weeks, I read Gardens of the Moon and Dead House Gates. I kind of crawled through those, and by the end of Dead House Gates especially, I'm just all in. I'm all in. And so I don't know where the series is going. I don't know what's happening in the later books at all. I'm totally keeping myself away from spoilers, but I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it so much. And as I was reading Memories of Ice, I got through the second chapter. So, I'm about 80-something pages in or so. And I thought, I got to talk about this because rarely have I ever seen a book that is just so explosive with cool stuff as Memories of Ice. So I've gone all the way back through it, and if you could see my book, it is so highlighted with just about everything. So instead of doing a review at the end of the book or even a review part way, I kind of want to talk about my experience throughout it and actually just have the book in my hand, and I'll be going through some readings and things. I'll be kind of going through each of the scenes. I'll have the scene dates on the side if you want to just skip around. This is going to be long form. I don't know how this is going to go, but it's going to be my complete reactions after reading it. I've already read the first 2 chapters. I think today, if I can, I'll just get through the prologue. But man, what a jam-packed prologue. And I want to just see how this goes. But can we just all appreciate how interesting of a writer Steven Erikson is? I know that Ian C. Esselmoff, is that his name? Also has books in this series, and I haven't read any of them, but I'm looking forward to it. But man, what a great writer. And it starts right away. I'm just going to read the first page of the prologue, especially, just so we can see some of this amazing stuff. It starts this way, and they have those interesting, sometimes those little blurbs that come from a historian or whatever, and we don't really know what to make of them. At least I don't. But this one was interesting. The ancient wars of the Talani Mass and the Jaghut saw the world torn asunder. Vast armies contended on the ravaged lands. The dead piled high, their bones the bones of hills, their spilled blood the blood of seas. Sorceries raged until the sky itself was fire. That comes from Ancient Histories, Volume 1. Kinnikik Karbarn. Okay. So this all starts, this prologue, and I wanted to go back through the prologue. I've read this prologue 3 times now. Once just as I was reading it on my own, another time to kind of highlight some stuff, which ended up being a lot. And actually, this is going to be my 3rd time here. But I wanted to read this first part, and this starts 300,000 years prior to the stuff that happens in the first 2 books, which is amazing because I've been looking forward to what happens with the Talani Mass and the Jaghut Wars. This is at the 33rd Jaghut War, and I just want to read this first page, especially, just to kind of geek out on this guy's writing. Swallows darted through the clouds of midges dancing over the mud flats. The sky above the marsh remained gray, but it had lost its mercurial wintry gleam, and the warm wind, sighing through the air above the ravaged land, held the scent of healing. What had once been the inland freshwater sea of the Imass, called Jaghut, born from the scattering of the Jaghut ice fields, was now in its own death throes. The pallid overcast was reflected in dwindling pools and stretched of knee-deep water for as far south as the eye could scan. But nonetheless, newly birthed land dominated the vista. the breaking of the sorcery that had raised the glacial age and returned to the region of old natural seasons, but the memories of mountain-high ice lingered. The exposed bedrock to the north was gouged and scraped, its basins filled with boulders. The heavy silts that had been the floor of the inland sea still bubbled with escaping gases, as the land, freed of the enormous weight of these glaciers passing 8 years past, continued its slow ascent. Jaghut's life had been short, yet the silts that had been settled on its bottom were thick and treacherous. What a writer. Now, this first scene starts with this Pran Chol guy. And I suppose I could just read through a bunch of things here, but it wouldn't be interesting. I don't think it would be interesting. This Pran Chol guy, I think the bone casters, as far as I can understand it, are the Talanai Mass, but when before they became all these undead weirdos, they kind of were mortals or something before they could do this ritual that would make it so they could break down and kind of skim over top of glaciers and then kind of reform or whatever out of the dust. And he's looking for someone in particular. But before that, he's looking at these 3 renag, which are animals, a bull male, his mate, and their calf, and they were stuck in some mud. And behind them, there were these tundra wolves that were also stuck in the mud. I believe there was something else, but it just kind of had them frozen in time. And he's looking at this and wondering when this happened, because weren't these animals supposed to be practically extinct? How long ago had this drama occurred? He asks to himself. The mud had hardened on Renag and I alike, forming cloaks of clay and latticed with cracks. So cool. So cool. And then someone comes to his side. It's this Canig Toll. And he's asking what lies below the clay. We don't really know that. His buddy asks him if he sees it as an omen. They talk about the surface of the land. He says, "We are the clay, and our endless war against the Jaghut is the struggling beast beneath. The surface is shaped by what lies beneath." And when I think of that, I think of, sometimes cities would get sieged and built. A new city would be built upon it. And you could see kind of these different layers within the DNA of one single city. And so far what I've seen, and it also has to do with the memories that were kind of built by what has come before us. And maybe we don't always know. We don't always know which part of us, which part of those things is most influencing us. Does that make sense? I really find this book especially to be super philosophical. A cool part here, Pran Chol, this lead hunter, looks down at his shadow. He sees that it's an antlered silhouette. It kind of, like Tool. Tool's the one, our boy Tool, who had maybe the coolest entrance of any character in a fantasy I've seen. In recent memory, I can't think of anyone that had a cooler entrance than coming out of the ground, gripping that guy's leg and dragging him down. Or not dragging him down. That's a cool part for later, sorry. But gripping the guy's leg and crushing it and stabbing the guy. Tool also is an antlered warrior, but he has one of his antlers broken off. And they are tracking. They are tracking a mother and two kids, 2 children. I guess the boy about 5, the girl about 4. These Jaghut, this Jaghut mother with her 2 children. He recognizes that they're weakening, that they'll be soon upon them, that they can make camp, and they'll soon find them. So this Jaghut mother, in the next scene, she pulls herself out of the mud and dropped down into the sandy bank, her breath coming in harsh, labored gasps, her son and daughter squirming free of her leaden arms. Very cool. And she knows she's being hunted. And within this scene especially, she also expresses that she knows that it's just something that is kind of done without malice, I suppose. I mean, you look at this and it is vicious that they're hunting a mother and a child, but it sounds like they're doing this out of necessity so that the danger of what happened before with the Jaghut tyrant, who almost took over everything, almost subjugated everyone, could have, as far as I understand, they don't want that to happen again. Even though the Jaghut were generally peaceful, as far as I can understand, they don't want them to go supernova. And so they are hunting them down in this 33rd Jaghut War. And, so she also recognizes that not only is this bonecaster behind her, she recognizes another bonecaster ahead that is also kind of tracking her, I suppose. And I didn't actually totally catch what the deal would be made, but there's this bargain. And this Jaghut mother recognizes that this Talani Mas is clanless and will take her children to safety, I suppose. I didn't catch exactly what the Talani Mas woman would get in return, but this is interesting. She sends off this child, both of these children, with the Talani Mas clanless woman, who we eventually will find out who her brother is, but we find out that is Tool, which is super cool and makes me wonder, did she, it sounds like she became clanless before Tool because of something that she did, but where she thinks it's freedom, he views it, at least in this early stage, as some sort of subjugation. I think I have that right. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's really cool. And at what point does Tool eventually kind of come to her way of thinking, if that ever happens, right? And what does that entail? This breaking from the link that would make them clanless. It doesn't sound like it's just walking away from the clan, but some kind of sorcery, which, again, I'll say super cool, but it is super cool. The next scene shows the earth cracked from some time in the past, a wound of such depth as to birth a molten river wide enough to stretch from horizon to horizon, I think going north and south. And as this Talani Mas clanless woman, Khaliva, or is that right? Let me just look. Let me make sure I get her name right, because I imagine she will be back many times. Is it Corlat? Is that right? Corlat? I'm gonna get a bunch of names wrong. But if you read these, no, I was right. Kalava. No, Kalava. Kalava or Kalava. Anyway, I'm going to get a bunch of these things right. Please have some patience with me. I think this is so cool, though. She takes them, and she is taking them towards this on the long flight across the Jaghut Hill that was mentioned at the start. And she is taking them towards this warren of some sort, which we assume, I guess, the reader assumes is the old Jaghut warren. She walks past these mounds that are in concentric circles around this larger mound. There is a tower that is found, this big blackened tower. And later, I'm not sure what to make of when this tower was made. I think she assumes, or someone assumes, that it is a Jaghut tower. And then later in the prologue, that'll be kind of refuted, and it's hard to know what to think in these. But there's this tower near all these hills, and behind it there's this red sky with this wound in it, this rent that is no longer bleeding, but it is damaged. And she doesn't recognize the warren. She says, it must be Omtos Falak. It certainly isn't Talan. Omtos Falak, I believe, let me just make sure, it's the Jaghut warren, which, how cool are these warrens? I don't understand any of them, but I want to know, especially with the warren from from Dead House Gates that they find themselves in, the Azure House, and they all just act super different, or they respond super different. So she thinks that this is the gate behind this tower. And the reason she thinks that, which I find is cool, is that no one would build a tower so close to this warren unless it was Jaghut. So she figures, yeah, it must be. And she's going to deposit these poor kids who are being hunted and who are being tracked. Remember, the bonecasters can track them, so she has to get them in a completely different warren. She struggles with the choice. She figures, well, I'm going to dump them in here. And there is a danger because there might be some kind of Jaghut inside who would be just as likely to kill them as it would be to adopt and take care of them. But, what's worse than death? She's going to just dump them in there. And I think we're going to find out that maybe she just sent them to their eternal torment or something. Who knows? The next scene, she rose and Pran Chol tested the air and frowned, and he kind of reaches out to this Jaghut. They run into the Jaghut mother, and she mentions about this other bonecaster who did a bargain with her. Doesn't really say much about it other than to say that now her children are out of the Talanai Mass hunter's reach. I believe he does not kind of feel their presence anymore. That might mean they're dead in his view. And he does this gesture with his spear and just cold-blooded kills this mother with or does this gesture with his hand, and the ones with the spears do that. And thus ended the 33rd Jaghut War. But, he says, we have no time to dilly-dally, and we have no time for a pyre. We have to head southward, where this bonecaster has taken the children south to mourn. And if I look on the map, I can't find a lot of things on the map, but luckily, if you look south on the map, it's way, way below what happens in the first book with Pale and Jerugistan. So they have to make sure that wherever this bonecaster has gone, is tracked down. And so that's what happens. Next scene, we have the saddest thing, as the bonecaster Kalava, or I can't keep going back. Kalava is about to dump these kids into this warren, but not go into the warren herself. Let me just read this. It's so sad. The faintest release of the power sent the two Jaghut children upward into the gate's maw. The girl cried out for a moment before reaching it, a longing wail for her mother. Who she imagined waited beyond. Then the two children vanished within. She kind of lied to them, saying, "Yeah, she's just going to be in there." Yep. And so this girl thinks she's going to be going into the arms of her mother. And then the bonecaster sighs and walks off. A Talan warren opens right behind her. When she spins around, who is it? It's this Pran Chol hunter. "I greet you, fellow bonecaster," says the woman, smiling. "Yes, I have sent them through. They are beyond your reach, beyond the reach of your vengeance. his tawny eyes fixed on her. Who are you? What clan? I have left my clan, but I was once counted among the Logros. I am named Kalava. And this is where we get a little bit. I tend to want to trust Pran's information here over Kalava, even though Kalava seems like she was trying to do the right thing. She seems maybe a little misguided here. I assume, right? He says, "You have come to the place called Morn, to the ruins of an ancient city." Jaghut, she says. Not Jaghut. This tower, yes, this tower's Jaghut, but it was built long afterward, in the time between the city's destruction and the Tul Arad. No clue what that means. It is not Omtos Falak, speaking of the warren behind the tower. Tell me this. How are such wounds sealed? You know the answer, Bonecaster. Then the woman, this part's so cool. She slowly turns to the rent. If a soul sealed that wound, she says, then it should have been freed when the children arrived. Freed, Pran Chol hissed. In exchange. Oh, snap. So what was in there before is exchanged for these two children. And it sounds like Pran, it sounds like this is not a good thing. Whatever was in there was not, it wasn't a good exchange that people would want to do. Perhaps he was in there for a reason. Very cool. Very spooky. Poor children. She asks, what has been freed? Pranchel shook his head and studied the central mound again. I'm not sure, but we shall have to do something about it sooner or later. I suspect we have plenty of time. And I think plenty of time to the Talanai Mass and to, you know, in terms of this world, I imagine that means hundreds of thousands of years, right? We'll have to do something about it eventually. But time we shall have. What do you mean? She asks. The gathering has been called. The ritual of Talan awaits us, Bonecaster. I think this is where I assume they all are turning into these bone dudes, extending their life, I guess, going from the pre-Talan Imass into the OG real Talan Imass that that tool has become. She spat. You're all insane. To choose immortality for the sake of a war? Madness. I shall defy the call, Bonecaster. Yet the ritual shall be done, he says. I have spirit walked into the future, Kalava. I have seen my withered face of 200,000 and more years. We shall have our eternal war. See, there we go. Very, very cool that he can do that. Who is your brother? He asks. Unos Tulan. So that's Tool. He brings up that she has destroyed her clan. She says, to break the link and thus achieve freedom. Alas, my eldest brother, I assume Tulan, skills more than matched mine. Yet now we are both free, though what I celebrate, Unos Tulan curses. And then turning back to the city then, who built it? Kachane Chamail. Kachane Chamail. It looks way cooler than the way I'm making it sound, but sounds like this is really, 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 really ancient. I know the name, but little else of them. Pranchel nodded. We shall, I expect, learn. As I expect I will too. Now, this next part of the prologue is so freaking cool. It jumps ahead 200,000 years, even though we're still, or nearly 200,000 years. We are still pre-Gardens of the Moon and Deadhouse Gates by 100,000 years. So it sounds like there was a huge leap ahead, which there was, but we're still way, way far from what we're going to be at. And it talks about this fall. this falling of a god. So it starts this way. The fall had shattered a continent. Forests had burned, the firestorms lighting the horizons in every direction, bathing crimson in heaven. Bathing crimson the heaven. Oh, I'm such an idiot. Bathing crimson the heaving ash-filled clouds blanketing the sky. So it went down in just this huge plume. The conflagration had seemed unending, world-devouring, weeks into months, and through it all could be heard the screams of a god. I mean, that is some world-building, scene-setting stuff right there. And I'm sorry that, I got to get better at reading out loud if I'm going to do this especially, but that is just so cool. And it was this scream that everyone could hear for, I assume, continents around, maybe just that continent, maybe worldwide, but I assume anywhere within the proximity can hear this screaming happen. Pain gave birth to rage to poison, and infection sparing no one. So when this happened, it's almost like everyone became these feral. It just infected everyone with this different way of kind of being. It almost like they're becoming feral animals. Animals and people killing each other. Man versus son, woman versus daughter, parents killing their children, animals doing the same thing. And then there's this lone figure walking along the landscape, wrapped in rotting rags. And it is this Krull elder god. And we'll meet these 3 elder gods, which is, I'm just blown away by the world building and the set piece. How do you say it? Just the laying down of this scene by Steven Erikson. In the distance, ragged bands eyed the figure as he strode. So this is Krull just walking along past all these feral people. Step by step, they're walking across what was left of the continent that would one day be called Corelri. Hunger might have driven them closer, but there were no fools left among the survivors of the fall, and so they maintained a watchful distance. This is purely survival of the fittest. Curiosity dulled by fear as they watched him. For the man was an ancient god, and he walked among them. This part's cool. Beyond the suffering he absorbed, Krull would have willingly embraced their broken souls, yet he had was feeding on the blood spilled onto this land. And the truth was this: the power born of that would be needed. So he's kind of feeding off this, which makes him seem wild, but it's almost like this greater good, at least in his eye. And then we see the foreign screaming god coming down from the sky. And as it's entering the atmosphere or whatever's happening, it is being ripped apart in its descent, and its pieces are streaking into flame and landing upon everyone. It's just landing all over the place, but especially on these summoners, the circle, the summoners of these sorcerers who have summoned this foreign god in their desperate attempt in kind of remedying this other problem that they had, perhaps not realizing that they had made something way worse happen. They did all of this to destroy one man. And this is the coldest king you could imagine. You know, in the first 2 books, I loved the characters, but it was hard to find exactly who to root for, and that's fine. But certainly in this book, it sets up some people that really have absolutely no redeeming qualities. And this king is the first one. We will have another character coming up in the first couple chapters. Holy moly. But this king, This king is brutal. The elder god had crossed the ruined continent, had looked upon the still living flesh of the fallen god that was being eaten by maggots, and these maggots would, they would eat this living flesh, and it would sprout them wings and stuff, and then they would kind of go up and be like, I don't know. I have no idea what to make of that, but it seems not good. The first empire had risen on a continent half a world away from where Krull now walked, an empire of humans, born from the legacy of the Talan Mass, from whom it took its name. So behind us is the day of the Talan Mass, and in front of us is the day of the human. As a writer myself, who has this world in mind, it's both frustrating and just so encouraging to read this series. Encouraging in the way that really you can be just so creative and just go for things. But frustrating that I will never, ever create something just so dense and deep as this. But so cool. So cool. Krull is on his way to stop this human king, which even the Jaghut tyrant didn't equal or match his cruelty. Even the Jaghut tyrant had more power, perhaps. It took a mortal human to achieve this level of tyranny over his kin. And so Krull, the elder god, and two other elder gods are going to converge. They're going to have this meeting, their first meeting they've had in a millennia. They've gone their separate ways, but they are united here to stop this king. So they're on their way to this kingdom. And a fourth presence is there, a beast of the earth who is watching them, a beast of white fur bloodied. And I think this is going to be important, this beast, because I think we have seen him also in chapter 1 coming up. And I want to know what's up with him, because as he's looking at these elder gods, he is even seeing them as ancient beings. So even he is way, way more ancient. And as they're going towards the Kalorian Empire, Kalor, he's the king. They're going towards the Kalorian Empire, and they see the air gray with ash and dust. Wow. And we will find out what that is. A familiar voice spoke in Krull's mind. Brother, I am upon the north shore, and I the west. Are you troubled? I am. All is dead. So they're getting to this continent, this kingdom, with millions of people put into slavery. 12 million slaves put under this king. But when they get there, it's all ash. All is dead, incinerated. The heat remains deep beneath the beds of ash and bone. A third voice spoke. Brothers, I am come from the south, where once dwelt the cities, all destroyed. The echoes of a continent's death cry still linger. Are we deceived? Is this an illusion? They too feel the death cry of this continent of ash. When they approach the king's throne, which happens to be on a mound of burnt bones, he's smiling. He knows they were coming. He addresses Krull, the opener of paths, Draconis of Tyam's kin, and speaking to the female elder god, he says, I was under the impression that you had abandoned your old self. Which makes me wonder what's going on with her. Almost like she can soul change, or, that's probably the wrong term. But I wonder about this one especially. I wonder what's up with her. They tell the king that they have come to end his reign of terror. But he doesn't so much give them any respect here. He raises their eyebrows, says that 50 others have tried the same. That even a foreign god was brought down to try to stop him. And this is perhaps the darkest part so far. Very well, the High King sighed. He leaned forward. You've come to liberate my people from my tyrannical rule? Alas, I am not one to relinquish such things. Not to you, not to anyone. He settled back and waved. Thus, what you would refuse me, I would refuse you. They are gone, all gone. Break the chains, will you? No, I surrender them. He grabs one of the arm bones from the throne. Free them. But how can you free them when they're all dead? He's just killed, incinerated all of his slaves. Or at least 7 million of his slaves. That's rough. And they are horrified, these three gods, these three elder gods. And they are going to place a new warren, or create a new warren, just for this mayhem, just for this destruction, where they are going to place Kalor as well, right? And Krull's going to do it within himself. And then here comes the punishment. 3 punishments from 3 different voices on one man. And they know what this king really wants. So the punishment is going to fit the crime, but it's also going to fit what would cut deepest within him. And it's interesting. This first one from Krull is going, you're going to be cursed with mortal life unending. So all the pains of mortal life, the anguish and despair, unending. Doesn't mean he will be ascended, but he will be in that state. Then from Draconis, you shall never ascend. And then from the sister, each time you rise, you shall fall. Everything he lays his hands on, every kingdom he tries to remake, any great ambition that he has will eventually fall to dust. And then he turns it on them, which is so cool. 3 curses from one man. Krull, you shall fade from the world. You shall be forgotten. Draconis, what you create shall be turned upon you. And as for you, woman, unhuman hands shall tear your body into pieces upon the field of battle. And we find her name here as the Sister of Cold Nights. Next scene. This is right before they're going to split. They have some words for each other. They pull, and I don't exactly understand this. Someone might have to explain this to me, even though maybe it would be too spoilery. Someone might have to explain this. But I have some questions about this first part of this next scene. I'll just read it. They left Kalor upon his throne, upon its heap of bones. They merged their power to draw chains around the continent of slaughter, then pulled it into the warren for that sole purpose, leaving the land itself bared or barred to heal. What the heck does that mean? Does it mean they've swept the continent? All the ash and all the mess is just swept away? Because at first when I read this, it's like they put a chain around the whole continent and just brought all the land and everything with it itself. But it's almost like it's all the mayhem, whatever the curse was, whatever happened is swept away. I'm confused by that. And anyway, once this happened, Krull immediately felt broken. And he could feel his worship already beginning to dwindle. which is cool. But I also like that it also mentions that this doesn't bother him as much as he thought that it would. He's kind of okay with it. Then Draconis. Since the time of all darkness, I have been forging a sword. The other two elder gods didn't know this. We find out, I believe, maybe later that this is Dragnipur, right? I had that written in my book, Dragnipur? Elamander Rake sword? So is he stuck? I assume that means he's stuck within this chain gang, right? Very cool. But to this, both Krull and the sister of Cold Knights turned, for they knew nothing of it. Draconis continued, the forging has taken a long time, but I am now nearing completion. The power invested within the sword possesses a finality. Then, Krull whispered, after the moment's consideration, you must make alterations in its final shaping. Does this... the way I read that is, even though this was supposed to be an eternal kind of hell, Warren, it's almost like they've created a way out. He's created a way out of this. Assuming that maybe, Perrin or Paran, he wasn't in there forever. Are all the chain people stuck there? I have to go back to that book to totally understand that. Is Draconis still in there? Who knows? And then this last one with the woman, with the elder goddess. Krull and the brother Draconis turned to their sister. She shrugged. I shall endeavor to guard myself. When my destruction comes, it will be through betrayal and not else. I love this. This was one of the first things I actually underlined in this book. There can be no precaution against such a thing, lest my life become its own nightmare of suspicion and mistrust. To this I shall not render. Until that moment, I shall continue to play the mortal game. She's not going to go around just being mistrustful of everyone. She's going to just keep going. She knows that that curse will probably come about eventually, but she's not going to just give in to mistrust. Careful then, Krull murmured, whom you choose to fight for. Find a companion, Draconis advised, a worthy one. Wise words from both of you. I thank you. Very cool. And they did this willingly, these three elder gods, to trap this one mortal king. But a fair exchange in their eyes. So cool. I must have said cool 800 times so far, but it is cool. And then the very last scene of the prologue has this one-eyed wolf or one-eyed beast. I think this is the one-eyed beast, right? It just says the beast watched the three figures part away. Riven with pain, white fur stained with blood. He just watches them kind of go into their warrens and just blink out of existence. But he's not going to follow them. He has also lost his mate, and he's looking for her, wondering, is she doing the same? And again, like I mentioned before, I think this is so cool because the Elder Gods, I thought, were the OG, oldest beings here. But this wolf looks at them as if they are just younglings. And he's going to continue his path looking for his mate. And I wonder about this first chapter because it has a wolf. It has a wolf. And I don't know if this is him or if that is her. But I guess we'll find out. What a cool prologue. Is this interesting to you? It might not be. I could just do more of a reaction without the readings, but I just love going through these scenes. And I don't know if I would be ready to just kind of give a reaction after the chapter, because I know I'm going to miss so much unless I open up the book and really go through it that way. What do you think? What do you think? Is this interesting to you? I know in the future I will have more to say on the chapters, a little more briefly, I think. But this prologue is just so dense with information. I think I'll have the next 2 chapters up, and I'll try to be a little bit more brief while also talking about each of these scenes and what I think about them, rather than just reading it. But what a cool book. I hope you enjoyed this. This is the blind Malazan Sherpa, blind Malazan Sherpa. And again, I think I have to do this without video, because I have to do this in chunks a little bit as well. Sometimes I have a job, so I can do this a little bit on lunch break. I have kids, so I have to do this a little bit in chunks. I was lucky enough to be able to do this in one go. But what do you think? Will this be something that interests you? And I might do the same treatment going back to the first 2 books, but I'm already on a roll. I want to just keep going with this 3rd book. I hope you'll enjoy this adventure with me. I'm not going to just go read through everything, because I think that would be very boring, even though I want to give you my genuine reactions. I don't know how I can best do that, but really cool. I'm really cool. I'm really excited to go on for this ride, especially because the next 2 chapters are just as explosive and interesting, especially chapter 2. But they're so interesting, and I will hopefully see you on the next one.